You know how some international stories just, well, they grab you by the collar and pull you right in?
Absolutely.
That's kind of what happened when we stumbled across this news about 3 Americans who were facing the death penalty in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's a wild ride.
It really is. Yeah, we've been looking at several news reports detailing, a really significant development, the commutation of those death sentences by President Tshisekedi.
Right. You flag these articles for me, and it's a story that just keeps unfolding, doesn't it? 3 Americans initially sentenced to death for their part in a failed coup attempt last year, and now their sentences changed to life imprisonment.
Mm-hmm.
It just feels like there's a lot more beneath the surface here.
Indeed. And for everyone listening, we want to dig into what actually transpired, who these individuals are, and maybe what this tells us about the bigger geopolitical landscape at play.
Yeah.
So, where should we begin?
Okay, let's start with the most recent piece, right? This commutation. President Felix Tshisekedi decided to change the death sentences for Benjamin Rubin, Zolman Polen, Marcel Malanga, and Tyler Thompson Jr. Change them to life in prison.
Mm.
And this is notable because it comes, more than 6 months after a military court handed down the original sentences?
Yeah, and that initial sentence is key. Over 30 people, not just the Americans, were condemned to death for their involvement in this coup attempt.
30 people.
Wow.
So the fact that the president specifically intervened in the cases of these 3 Americans, well, it suggests there's something significant about their situation, you know?
It really does. It really does. And it makes you wonder about the coup itself. The reports say it happened in Kinshasa, the DRC's capital, back in 2024.
Right.
And it was led by a name that probably wasn't on many people's radar, Christian Malanga.
Well, what's fascinating here is Malanga's background. He wasn't just, an average citizen trying to stir things up.
No. No, he was apparently a wealthy businessman, a former captain in the Congolese army. And he even had political aspirations. Ran for election back in 2011, which actually led to him being detained for a bit.
Oh, interesting. So this wasn't his first foray into the political arena then?
Not at all.
And this wasn't some quiet behind-the-scenes plot either. The targets included the presidential palace itself.
Right. And a close ally of President Tshisekedi.
So, they were aiming right for the heart of the government.
Precisely. The news accounts describe a direct assault on the very symbols of power. And tragically, 6 people lost their lives during this attempt.
Yeah.
It really underscores how serious and, frankly, violent the situation became.
And then there's the incredibly dramatic end for Christian Malanga himself. He was reportedly killed while resisting arrest.
Mm-hmm.
And get this, he was apparently live streaming the whole thing.
Live streaming, wow.
Yeah. That detail just highlights the almost unbelievable nature of this whole event.
It certainly speaks to a certain level of audacity, maybe even a disconnect from reality. And his declaration of himself as president of Niger.
Right, Niger.
It further emphasizes this grand, if ultimately unsuccessful, vision he held.
Okay, so let's focus then on these 3 Americans who've now had their sentences commuted. Benjamin Rubin, Zolman Polen, he's 36, the oldest.
Mm-hmm.
He reportedly had a connection to Christian Malanga through a gold mining company.
Ah, the gold mining link. That sounds like a potentially important piece. Could tell us more about motivations or maybe even funding behind the attempt?
Yeah, exactly. It certainly raises questions, doesn't it, about
Right.
the financial side of this operation. Were there business interests at play? Was it purely personal, or did it involve a wider network?
Those are the kinds of details that, often remain murky in situations like these.
True. Then we have Marcel Malanga, Christian Malanga's own son, 21 years old.
And a U.S. citizen.
A U.S. citizen, right?
Yeah.
Which immediately adds that international dimension. And his testimony in court painted a pretty stark picture. He claimed his father essentially forced him and the other American, Tyler Thompson Jr., to participate under threat of death.
That's a really significant and frankly disturbing claim. If true, it introduces a critical element of coercion
Absolutely.
that could certainly influence how their involvement is perceived, both, legally and ethically. The idea they were acting under duress changes the whole context.
Completely. And Tyler Thompson Jr., also 21, he sounds like he might have been, completely out of his depth.
How so?
He was just a high school friend of Marcel's, who apparently traveled all the way from Utah, believing it was just a free vacation.
A free vacation. And ends up in a coup attempt.
I know, it's hard to imagine such a drastic misjudgment of a situation.
It really underscores the potential for manipulation, maybe?
Yeah.
And the vulnerability of individuals, especially young people, who might not fully grasp the gravity of the circumstances they're walking into.
Yeah, to travel internationally on that premise.
Well, and find yourself caught in a violent coup. It's almost beyond belief.
The reports also mention that, while most of those involved were Congolese, there were others.
Yeah.
From the UK, Belgium, Canada.
Right. So this wasn't just a domestic issue within the DRC.
Not at all.
This international mix of participants, it suggests a broader network, perhaps. Individuals drawn into Malanga's orbit for various reasons. Could be ideology, financial incentives, or maybe, like we heard, personal connections that were exploited.
And it's worth noting, too, that not everyone who was tried was convicted.
That's an important point, yes. 14 people were actually acquitted.
14 acquitted.
Which suggests the court, even though it was a military court, did differentiate between levels of involvement and the evidence against each defendant.
Right, so it wasn't just a blanket conviction for everyone rounded up.
Apparently not. It indicates some level of distinction in the legal process.
Okay, so we have this failed coup, the convictions, and now this commutation, specifically for the Americans. But the timing of this commutation, that's what really stands out. The reports explicitly mention that this comes as the DRC is actively trying to secure a significant minerals deal with the U.S.
Ah, the minerals deal.
Yeah, potentially in exchange for security support.
This is where the situation really takes on that wider geopolitical significance. The DRC is incredibly rich in natural resources, especially minerals crucial for things like batteries, cobalt, lithium.
Stuff the U.S. needs.
Exactly. And the U.S. has clear strategic interests in the region, particularly given the ongoing conflict in the eastern part of the country. This context definitely elevates the significance of any potential deal and the leverage it might give the DRC.
Right, leverage. And this security support is reportedly aimed at helping the DRC fight those Rwandan-backed M23 rebels in the east, where the conflict has been intensifying. It sounds like a really unstable, dangerous situation over there.
Extremely. The UN has expressed serious alarm about the escalating violence. I mean, reports of summary executions, widespread rapes, as M23 forces have advanced. It underscores the urgency and the severity of the security challenges the DRC is grappling with right now.
And there are even direct talks scheduled between M23 and the Congolese government coming up soon, right? April 9th.
That's what the reports say.
Yeah.
Yes. So this whole region is clearly a focal point of international concern and activity.
Precisely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
the fact that President Trump's new senior advisor for Africa, Masad Boulos, is scheduled to travel to the DRC and other African nations starting just, a day after this commutation was announced.
The timing is certainly suggestive. It raises important questions about potential diplomatic connections, doesn't it?
It definitely makes you wonder if there were diplomatic back channels at play here.
Well, Boulos' stated goals are advancing sustainable peace in eastern Congo and promoting U.S. private sector investment.
Which lines up pretty neatly.
It all seems very intricately linked. These things often involve a complex interplay of political power, economic interests, security concerns. In this case, U.S. interest in the DRC's resources and stability in a volatile region clearly impacts foreign policy decisions.
So, beyond just needing security, what might the DRC be hoping to gain from a minerals deal with the U.S., and what kind of leverage does that give them in this specific situation with the Americans?
Well, the DRC likely seeks enhanced security, yes, but also increased foreign investment, economic development, maybe greater international legitimacy.
Yeah.
Their vast mineral wealth gives them considerable leverage, especially with countries like the U.S. eager to secure access to those critical resources.
Right.
And that leverage could certainly be used to advance their own strategic goals, potentially including resolving sensitive consular cases like this one involving the Americans.
Okay, so let's try and bring it all together then. We had this dramatic, almost unbelievable failed coup attempt in the DRC, led by this flamboyant former military figure, Christian Malanga. 3 Americans somehow got caught up in it, were convicted, sentenced to death by a military court.
Right.
And now, months later, their sentences are commuted to life imprisonment, right as the DRC is actively pursuing a crucial minerals deal and security backing from the United States.
Amidst a very serious and escalating conflict in its eastern region.
Exactly.
That's a pretty concise overview of the key events and their potential interconnections. And yeah, the timing of this commutation, especially against the backdrop of strengthening ties with the U.S., certainly invites us to consider the complex, often intertwined nature of international diplomacy.
And the various factors that influence national decisions.
Absolutely. And considering the complexities of their specific situations, Zalman Paulun's business ties, a younger Malanga's claim of coercion, Thompson's apparent naivete, it really sets the stage for understanding why their cases might have been viewed differently, especially when diplomatic implications are on the table.
It really does make you think about all the moving parts. Considering all these different facets, the internal political instability in the DRC, that brutal regional conflict, the involvement of these foreign citizens.
Yeah.
What does this whole situation tell us about, I don't know, the interconnectedness of global events and the different motivations driving different players on the world stage?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, it really leaves you contemplating the long-term ramifications for the individuals involved, obviously, but also for the DRC navigating these challenges and for the direction of U.S. foreign policy in such a strategically important region. Lots to mull over.